Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday. It's Friday, July 15th, 2022. Time for another show. Time to catch up on, all the things that have happened during the week that we've forgotten about so far, haven't gotten to yet, or are preparing to debate over the weekend, perhaps. Many different directions in which we might go. Things happening on Capitol Hill that we haven't had a chance to pay attention to lately. Things happening all over the world that we haven't had a chance to pay attention to yet. And some interesting developments in the last day or two on the abortion front. Just as we mentioned yesterday, the very strange but telling story of how the Republicans, the story around the story, how Republicans are dealing with the story out of Ohio of the 10-year-old girl who was raped and became pregnant, and that that the case was that, of course, she had to leave Ohio in order to obtain an abortion. She had to go to, was it Indiana? Because post-Dobbs, I guess we should say, as Greg frequently corrects us, that post-Dobbs, the Roe having been overturned, the trigger laws in place in Ohio made it such that the abortion after the 6th week of pregnancy, which we've discussed a number of times and many of you know inherently is a dicey business, even trying to tell you when the 6th week is, but that was by design by the anti-abortion forces to make it complicated and make everybody worry about being prosecuted as a criminal if they were unsure whether they were at week 5 and 5 days or week 6 and 2 days or what have you. And that was very intentional. At any rate, this girl had to be brought to Indiana, where I guess it was still arguably legal to get the procedure that she needed. And now, of course, in addition to the Republicans lying about the situation in innumerable ways, I guess I should detail all of them just to be sure that we have them. I don't know that I have them all right, so you need to tell me, I guess. Use that KITM hashtag to remind me of details that I'm missing. But on the one hand, first of all, there are Republicans in Ohio who the whole story is, of course, this whole situation is morally repugnant on every level. And as we mentioned yesterday, Erin Carmon's comment on it was that this just goes to show that for anti-abortion forces who really just ultimately don't care about what kind of harm they bring to others, just so long as they get their way and they look to be winning for various reasons, and I'm sure they would justify all of this to themselves, but they just want to look like they're winning on this thing. But the Ohio Republican apparatus took the tack of claiming this was all unnecessary, even if true. First, I guess, there was national Republicans just saying, this story's not true. We'll get to that in a second. But Ohio Republicans were saying, it's not true, it's a misunderstanding or a misapplication of our law. It does not say that this girl, such a sympathetic victim here, would be ineligible to abort this still embryo, I guess, at this point, but to an abortion at this stage, or any stage. This is one of those things that everyone used to think of as an exception to the law. Back in the days when we walked the tightrope and said, rape, incest, life of the mother, the quick catchphrase of the exceptions to the abortion bans that anti-abortion forces were willing at one point to accept. No longer the case. So anyway, Ohio Republicans arguing, no, you misunderstand. We're not that crazy and draconian, but they are. And as a matter of fact, I think the authors of the bill have come forward at some point to say, it actually would be banned, and it was fully our intention to ban it. but they got their signals crossed. So some portion of the Republicans in Ohio saying this is all a made-up lie for political gain by Democrats, which is kind of crazy because what it means at bottom is that, yeah, sure, we believe that Democrats are out there setting up the rape of 10-year-olds and impregnating them so that they can make a political point, which is insane, except for the fact that it just also follows all the rest of the trajectory of what now ridiculously mainstream Republicans actually believe. I mean, remember, these are the people who also claim to believe that all Democrats are involved in child sex trafficking and are pedophiles. So once you believe that, I suppose it's a short leap to, and one of the things that they're doing is impregnating 10-year-olds so that they can make the political point that they want to make with the most sympathetic victim ever. Of course, several points could grow out of that. One, of course, being that the base assumption that all anybody's are pedophiles and groomers and child sex traffickers is crazy to start with. Two, of course, we're not making up victims. We're just telling you what happens in real life. And you guys are the ones living in fantasy land, one where the enemy is constantly trafficking in children. By the way, and then we end up having to arrest you guys for trafficking in children, which is also kind of weird. And yeah, you would even think to level those charges and lay that at the feet of your political opponents is pretty crazy all by itself. The Indiana Republicans apparently agreed that, yes, unfortunately, from their perspective, Indiana law still allowed an abortion for this child, and they want to ban that before. I don't know whether you know what, I'm so confused on the facts of the case itself, and I'm so wrapped up in the debate around whether or not there are any facts, which is insane, that I don't even know exactly what was the outcome of all of this. Indiana apparently attempted to maybe race to plug that hole. I don't know whether it really had any hope of stopping this procedure for this particular individual. It may already be over with. I haven't even had a chance to read the factual stories of, okay, who's the girl and what happened to her? And I guess they're not going to, who knows? They're not going to report necessarily on who the girl is. Although, believe me, apparently the political right is very anxious to let you know who's involved here so that you can picket on her lawn or chase her out of a steakhouse. They got 10 steakhouses every day. Worse than Kavanaugh, I'm sure. You have Jesse Waters over at Fox News doing his best to have the doctor who treated this girl in Indiana murdered, most likely, posting her picture all over the place and putting her on TV, putting the picture on TV. And but yes, the Indiana Republicans now taking the tack of, well, maybe we should arrest and revoke the medical license of the doctor who treated this girl because reasons. And they were having difficulty putting their finger on a reason because, of course, if you're at the same time racing to change the law so that a 10-year-old who's been raped can't come to your state and get an abortion, but then it's either too late or whatever. I don't know what the circumstances were. But if you're racing to change the law, then, I mean, that has to mean, I think, in a world where words mean things, we're not in that world right now, but in a world where words mean things, I think that racing to change the law has to be taken as an acknowledgement that the law currently allows this procedure. You wish it wouldn't, but it does, and you're trying to change it. If you're trying to change it, that means that it isn't the way you want it right now, right? So, okay, they can't arrest the doctor or take away her license for doing this thing, even though they wish they could. Maybe next time, so that they come up with something else. And the somewhat creative angle that they came up with on that one apparently was, well, in Indiana, of course, as in most states, we have a law that requires doctors to report situations like this in order to crack down on it from a social services point of view. Not the abortion, but the rape. If you have a 10-year-old in your office seeking an abortion, that should be a red flag, and it was. And, of course, then there's a duty imposed legally in Indiana and most states, like I said, on a doctor to say, all right, well, this needs to be reported to someone. Obviously, there's been a rape or some sort of, clearly some inappropriate sexual contact of some kind. I guess when it's a 10-year-old, it's just rape. It's statutory rape. There's just no way around it. There's no defining it differently. But wait, you can define anything differently. So, all right. So then the doctor had a duty to report this to social services of some kind in Indiana. And the fact that they went ahead and performed the procedure without meeting this reporting requirement means that we can arrest her, take her license, something. Let's look into what can we do to ruin it for this person who actually helped a 10-year-old. Well, that's a little difficult to say. The idea, for instance, people pointing out, I don't know how it will work out legally, but equitably, I suppose, thinking about the idea of, well, you failed in your duty to report. I failed in my duty to report this case that everyone in the country is reporting, the one that everybody's talking about. Who was I supposed to report this to? First of all, it happened in Ohio, not in Indiana. And second of all, by the time she arrived in my office, it had been reported all over the news everywhere. And by the way, when it was reported in the news all over the place, who was it? See if you can refresh my memory. Who was it who said, no, that did not happen. It is a lie. It's a hoax. In fact, I'm so sure it didn't happen. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the only reason we're reading about it is because, just like I told you, that whole other political party is all pedophiles and all child sex traffickers, and they probably raped that 10-year-old just for political points. Oh, okay. Obviously there's no talking to you, but the idea that you would then try to leverage, a relatively sane law, which is like, maybe doctors should report to the police when they think there's been a rape. What's the point? You wouldn't believe them even if they did report it. At least, and then if it became to your political advantage now to believe that there was a rape, aha! It's just, again, like when we were just talking about, well, we need to change the state of the law. That doesn't mean that the law isn't perfect now and that we can't arrest that doctor. A judge says, no, it does mean that. You can't arrest that doctor. Fine. We'll go somewhere else. We'll go a different direction to try to get at that doctor. And here, you have to report a rape that happened, or else you're in trouble. Okay, I mean, that seems a little dumb because it's all over the newspaper about here. I hereby report that rape. Of course, this is the rape that you just spent the last week saying didn't happen. But now you're going to arrest me because it did, and I didn't tell you that it did. I did tell you that it did. You didn't believe it. Now that you have to believe it, why do you have to believe it? Totally different part of the story. Someone's been arrested for it. Now you believe it. Where were you a week ago when I told you that there was a rape and you said, no, there wasn't? Now you're going to arrest me for not telling you that there was. That's crazy. But there's a lot of crazy going around these days. The other aspect of this, of course, and here it takes women speaking up, I think, to make people make sense of this thing. Because once it was said, I said, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I understand that. I get that. Why didn't that occur to me right away? And it could be anything. I mean, it could be, well, you're a man, so it's not going to occur to you right away. It could be, no, it occurs to plenty of men right away, too. You just, were confused by the details. Or you were worried about what's in the John Eastman memo. Or you were worried about what Steve Bannon is doing. Or you were worried about war crimes in Ukraine. Or maybe you were worried about crimes against humanity in China against the Uyghur population there. Or global warming. Or one of the other things. Or fixing the fence that needed to get fixed, and the kid had to get to the dentist. Whatever it was that distracted you from this. It could have been anything. But, as they point out, the Republican play on this thing, particularly from people like the execrable Jim Jordan, one of the most horrific Republicans in Congress in history, I guess. I mean, the guy, his entire career is about denying that he knows about sexual abuse that's going on and pretending it doesn't happen and just letting people go on with this stuff while accusing everybody else of being child sex traffickers and pedophiles. Anyway, his tack on a lot of this was, well, I think this whole thing was made up for political points. And my proof is no one's been arrested. In other words, as the women pointed out, I get it. It's not a rape until you find a way to involve an actual a man in it, where it's not important to us. This nothing to do about this. It's all a hoax. We shouldn't activate law enforcement in any way, shape, or form. The only thing we should be doing is trying to figure out how to stop the victim in this case from getting any kind of relief medically from what's going on medically in her body. That we have to work on, but it can't be a rape because no one got arrested for it. And that's the sort of thing that makes a stupid sort of sense to, I don't know, lizard brain types, I guess, for a while like me. I mean, it never convinced me, oh, well, no one's been arrested, so therefore it couldn't have happened. Duh. I mean, a normal person with just an ounce of thought says, at the very least, says, that's not what defines whether a crime has happened here. I mean, lots of crimes. Have you ever heard of unsolved crime? Like, is that a thing in your brain, right? Are those not crimes because they didn't arrest anybody? But as the women were pointing out, once again, the women get, and the problems that the women have are, or girls in this case, is getting defined out of existence, right? There's been a rape, but not in your mind because no one's been arrested for it. The man hasn't been involved by name yet. So it's just an unfortunate thing in your brain. Oh, yeah, no, that's fairly serious. Why does it take an arrest to turn this into a rape? It doesn't. It was one the minute it happened. We have this problem. We have it everywhere. We have it among law enforcement. Maybe some of the reason we don't do very well in making a whole lot of arrests about rape. There's the evidentiary problems. There's the, find the suspect, the needle in a haystack kind of a problem too. But then there's also the problem of police taking their reports and they're being taken by people dressed in police uniforms who actually don't believe that I have to write this down because regulations say so. Otherwise I could get fired, but put on paid administrative leave is what could happen. But I don't believe this thing is a rape, and I'm not going to be looking around for a rapist because I don't believe one happened here. The candidate we have here running in one of the nearby congressional districts that we talked about the other day, whose name has already escaped me, but the woman who basically, involving herself in this same debate, said, I don't think that this could really be a rape because, if you're pregnant, that means it wasn't a rape because you can't get pregnant from rape. A woman said this. Not only that, a woman who is a police officer and could be taking police reports, of rape. And imagine being a person that doesn't even believe that a rape is possible, having to do the investigation. How hard are they going to be looking for the rapist if they don't even believe that there was one? Anyway, it's crazy out there. And I say, like I said, we're in a world where words no longer mean anything. One of the other highlights of the day, I don't know whether I put this aside in pocket or not, but I definitely retweeted it. But I'm going to have to go searching for it because I don't know what the background of the situation was. But it was video from testimony before a House committee. And I don't know which one, but we'll find it. We'll look it up because all the clues are in the tweet here. Eric Swalwell is taking the opportunity to question one Catherine Glenn Foster, an anti-abortion activist here. And I don't know what committee it was. We could look it up, what Eric Swalwell is on, but that'll be a distraction for the moment. And the clip that was circulating was essentially in this logical confrontation with Catherine Glenn Foster, who I also saw a lot of people commenting on her and who she was, and I didn't straighten those details out in my mind, and we probably should. This is very different from the way we do the show normally, but this all has to come out, I think, for me. At any rate, what's going on here is Swalwell is basically demonstrating Irene Carmon's point, which is, look, there's just never going to be a victim sympathetic for them, enough for them to admit that their position is immoral. And they can't admit that because they think they're the moral crusaders here. So they're never going to come around to this. But essentially, they're looking for a way to justify a position that allows saying, yes, a 10-year-old girl who's raped must be forced to carry that baby to term. And that's a very unpopular thing to say. And we're looking for any way we can think of not to say it. So yesterday's way of not to say it was, they said, are you familiar with that situation? Are you familiar with the situation in which the 10-year-old in Ohio was raped and impregnated and had to go to Indiana because of the stupid law in Ohio, and that they're racing to try to do the same thing in Indiana, but luckily before that happened, she was able to go and get treatment in Indiana. And essentially the answer is, well, that's not an abortion. Right? Swalwell is putting it to Foster here as the tweet that I have here from Acyn. Are we pronouncing it right? ACYN, who's a very prolific tweeter of these clips. Swalwell saying it would not be an abortion if a 10-year-old with her parents made the decision not to have a baby that was a result of a rape, and that is her position. She says, yes, that's not an abortion. Swalwell apparently saying afterwards, are you familiar with disinformation? But this is the position that they're forced into, and that this is their escape route. I mean, there's no dealing with, this is why you can't coexist, much less co-govern, with people who are just not on the same planet in terms of the way they use language. But there is an interesting angle to this somewhere that might be exploitable, but this is their position now. Well, it's not that it's an exception to the rule against abortion, it's that it's outside of the definition, in their view, of abortion. They know that it's morally repugnant, even among their own people, in many cases, to say that, yes, the outcome of our logical position here is that we have to force 10-year-olds to carry rapists' babies to term. Yep, sorry, we're just going to have to shoulder that burden. No, instead they just say, well, if you do that, if you abort that baby, then that's okay, because it's not an abortion. It is an abortion, but let's say that it's not, and it's a very different thing. You know how, what it brought to mind for me is the debates we've had from everywhere, but including most recently the January 6th committee, plus also the previous impeachments, where the Republicans' favorite line on everything was, that's hearsay. All the evidence is all just hearsay. It's just hearsay, 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 hearsay. And you're used to it from crime dramas. Oh, hearsay, that's a bad thing. Well, that's because it's a courtroom drama that's going on. And it matters in the courtroom whether or not something is hearsay. In a hearing, of course, it doesn't. But on top of that, there's nuance to hearsay. There are things that are hearsay, and then, of course, there's an entire universe of things that are not hearsay. But in the middle there are things that are hearsay and would ordinarily be ruled inadmissible as hearsay, but for the enshrinement in the federal rules of evidence of exceptions to hearsay. And there are many, and there's a number of them, and I forget what it is, but I think it's 20-something is what comes to mind. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's been many years since I had to know the number of exceptions to hearsay. You're supposed to know what those exceptions are, and there are several. And I don't really feel like running down the list, but I remember some of the phrasing of some of them, and they'll only make sense to people who went to law school or who want to look up things like present sense impression. Yes, this statement would otherwise be hearsay, but if it describes the witness's then present sense impression of what had gone on, that is to say, what they are reported as having said was their then, at the time of the crime, present, or immediately afterwards, whatever, their present sense of what happened, and you overheard that and you're repeating that, then that is perhaps a permissible piece of evidence, not because it isn't hearsay, it fits the definition, an out-of-court statement made by, made to prove the truth of the matter asserted. There's a whole definition, right? Well, that was an out-of-court statement, and it was offered to prove the truth of what they were saying. The thing that they were saying was true. It was their impression of what happened. But because it was immediately after the crime, and there's good reason to believe that they don't yet know that there will be a courtroom proceeding about it. Sometimes you have that idea when there's a crime, but maybe it's a civil case, whatever. The point is they would admit that as evidence, though it was hearsay, but it would be admitted under an exception to the hearsay rule. So there's that gray area. So, I mean, we've operated for many years under the exceptions analog in the abortion arena. Abortion is, prohibited after X number of weeks or whatever it is. The number's been shrinking. But in the cases of, as they always phrase it, rape, incest, life of the mother, then we will allow an exception to the ban. Now, this is probably all of those things. So it's an abortion, but it's an allowable abortion under the exception rule. But she is taking the position that it's not an abortion. It's not hearsay. This is one of the other things that it isn't. But, okay, this one's not an abortion, despite the fact that it meets every definition of what an abortion would be, and everybody can see that that's exactly what happened. And if it wasn't an abortion, why did she have to leave Ohio to get it, is the real question. And the answer is, I don't care. I'm simply going to say it's not an abortion, because if I say it is an abortion, but I'm allowing it, then I'm out of the club, and my people will be mad at me. But if I simply say, let's all accept, for instance, as a matter of faith, and we're all into faith, that this is a not abortion, then we're all going to be okay. Well, I gotta tell you, for a minute, I'm thinking, and we discussed this around the home yesterday and earlier today, is that an acceptable solution? Would you be willing to let them say what they need to say to deal with it if we could get them to turn around and mind their own business and the medically necessary abortion could be performed? Or is that conceding too much? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. I am reliably informed. I'm informed, certainly, and I think reliably so, by our good friend Darwin Darko, who says that, and brings the proof from the local paper, the Indianapolis Star. The Indy Star indicates, and Darwin passes on the message, that the doctor, apparently under the Indiana law, has 3 days to report for cases under 16 on the pregnancy and the rape, of course. And she did it on day 2, so nothing burger. Okay, well, I guess that solves that question, right? They should never have been out there saying anything about it because the law had, in fact, been complied with. And my rant on it was a big waste of time. But the real problem was that I didn't have TweetDeck up top on all of my windows. I would have seen that thing instantly right in the middle of the diatribe about it. But let's go and take a look at what's going on here just to get the background on the record. The Indy Star reporting here. The article I have here is from yesterday, the 14th. Tony Cook writing for the paper. Indiana doctor, and they're identifying her, and I don't think she's afraid, so it's okay, I guess, to go ahead with it. Caitlin Bernard, that's the doctor's name, reported the 10-year-old Ohio girl's abortion records show. But let's go on television and say not only did she not do it, but we should rip away her medical license and possibly arrest her for failure to report that thing which had already been reported, not only at large in the newspapers around the country, but in fact and in specific actuality, in this case, by this doctor, thereby fulfilling the obligations of the law. But by all means, go on, it's a fantastic strategy, right? Did it not work? Did I not get on here and say that I told you that the claim was stupid and we should consider it to be immoral and irrelevant regardless, even if it met the letter of the law. But the sad fact is that it didn't, in fact, meet the letter of the law in terms of establishing criminal liability, but yet everybody was talking about it as though it had and looking for a workaround or an exception, when in fact just plain old read the law, execute the law tells you, oh yeah, there's actually no problem here. It's all done. This is just another indication of how you can't deal with these people on a rational level, right? They just define that to not be an abortion if they can't reconcile things. Do we want to, and remember, we want to come back to that question, can we accept that? Should we accept that? But at the same time, maybe we shouldn't, because it's an awfully dangerous tool to put in their hands, considering what other mischief they can make, like going on television and saying we ought to arrest this doctor. Why? For what purpose? Well, we realize we can't say because we don't like her or what she did. There has to be something. Well, because she failed to report this thing. No, she didn't. She actually reported it. Yes, but the point is, I have said on television that she did not. And now there's hundreds of millions of people running around saying she didn't. That's why I did it. But you're a hypocrite and a liar. Ah, yes. Did I need to remind you that the playbook says, don't worry about it. They will call you a hypocrite and a liar. Be prepared for this. If you're not up to that task, if you're not up for that chore, then look for another line of work. Yes, doing the work we need you to do will lead to your being called out as a hypocrite and a liar. On the upside, 100 million people will believe the dumb thing that you said is true or contains some kernel of truth and needs to be taken seriously, and will waste 20 minutes on their radio show talking about it. Mission accomplished. Ah, I see now. Oh, and also my bank account is full. Thank you very much. Okay. So that's how it works. Tony Cook reports the reality of it, though. The Indiana physician who provided abortion services to a 10-year-old Ohio girl who was raped disclosed the abortion in a form filed with the Indiana Department of Health and Department of Child Services, according to documents obtained by the Indy Star through a public records request. In other words, they wondered, are these Republicans right? Let's call the authorities and ask them, was there a report? Hold on, I'll check. Tap, tap, tap. Yes, there was. Oh, so is there any law out there that says we can go and punch the people who said that she didn't report it? Can we kick them in, places where it would hurt particularly? I want to kick them, right in the, okay, so we can use the horn there just to give, because it's such a fun subject. Anyway, what happens to that person? Nothing. And they'll be on the Sunday shows nonetheless. And taken seriously, and boo-hoo, why isn't this person on the 1-6 committee, right? I think the question's asked and answered. But anyway, all right, we'll go on with the reporting here. Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita, I don't know how he pronounces it, but I should. He's going to be in the news he's now in the news, going to be in the news for a couple of weeks because he too appears to be a lying sack of crap. But Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita and some news outlets have called into question whether Dr. Caitlin Bernard, the Indianapolis OBGYN who performed the procedure, properly reported the disturbing case, which has become a flashpoint in the national debate over abortion. Except, really what this story should say is that Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita baselessly called into question whether the reporting had been done. And really, honestly, if the Indy Star can get it through a public records request, how much faster do you think the Indiana Attorney General could have found out? Like, did he pick up the phone and say, I got an appointment to go on TV and say that she didn't report? Can you tell me whether she reported first? Yes, we can. Click, click, click. The answer is she's reported. This is a non-issue. And maybe he already did that. It's entirely possible he actually did do that. And he'll get out there and say, this is an outrage. I did do that. Well, what'd you find out? And I guess for logic's sake, he would have to say, well, they told me that it was indeterminate at the time. And but now I see that, or I'll retract it, or I don't even care. I'll just lie. He may just have said, oh, the answer is yes. What if I went on TV and said the answer was no? Everyone would believe me. I'm the Attorney General. Of course the Attorney General will be able to know whether or not a report has been made. It's like certainly part of my portfolio, right? Yeah, maybe. I mean, you'd think it's a law enforcement issue, a rape, right? But it is, again, a report to the Department of Health and Department of Child Services, not the Department of Justice or Department of Law, as they like to call it down in Florida. So maybe the information was in a different department, and maybe the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. I don't know. But it didn't stop him from doing the thing he needed to do to score the political points he wanted to score. So how do you like that? The information was available, but the Indiana Attorney General either didn't care to know it or didn't care to relate it to you correctly. An attorney for Bernard, the doctor, said the doctor followed the law and made the appropriate disclosures. She said Bernard is considering legal action against those who have smeared her. So that's nice, I guess. I'm glad that she's striking back. But, the law doesn't give people who have been maligned this way nearly enough leverage to take it out on the people who did it because, they don't care. In all likelihood, because it's the Attorney General, he'll probably end up using state taxpayer money to defend himself against this thing. And even if it wasn't the Attorney General, how often do people like this just become cause celebs and start a GoFundMe and collect more money than it takes to actually mount the defense? And then who knows what, get sponsorships from Black Rifle Coffee or whatnot and live as a quasi-celebrity for the rest of their life. Rokita, or however he says his name, told Fox News on Wednesday that his office was investigating whether Bernard had failed to report the abortion and sexual abuse as required by Indiana law. His comments came one day after Ohio police arrested a 27-year-old man who they say admitted to raping the child. We're gathering the evidence as we speak, and we're going to fight this to the end, including looking at her licensure, Rokita said. If she failed to report it in Indiana, it's a crime for, and then changing directions, to not report, to intentionally not report. Well, what about if she actually reported and intentionally reported and complied with everything, and you're just absolutely full of it? What about pulling your licensure? Like maybe you should lose your law license for speaking as the Attorney General, either without checking or even worse, with checking and knowing the truth but lying anyway. Why isn't that something that's in jeopardy? Your law license, your term in office. You should be removed from office for something like that. What if that were the consequence? It would happen less times, I guess. Despite the newly disclosed form, Rokita said Thursday, this is interesting. So now, despite learning that this was absolutely untrue, Rokita says on Thursday, that's yesterday, that he plans to forge ahead with his investigation. What are you investigating? Who didn't tell me that the form had been, and why not? It was rigged. Or, the form, she, this number here, she put her phone number down here, and she gave a false phone number. She falsified the information. Well, what do you mean? Well, she says her telephone number ends in 1237. I need to do something here easy to remember, but I needed a 7 in there. Okay, yeah, but her phone number is 1237, so what's the problem? This says 123T or something like this, like a weird T or a backwards F or something at the end of this thing. Now, that's a 7. She's just one of those people that crosses her 7s. I think that's an odd thing to do, but people do that. That is a 7. Not where I'm from. Not in Indiana, it's not a 7. I don't know what that is. I can't tell. So she's under arrest. Whatever. I don't know what they're going to make up, but they're going to have an investigation. As we stated, we are gathering evidence from multiple sources and agencies related to these allegations, he said in an emailed statement. Our legal review of it remains open. I guess, oh, well, there was bamboo fibers in the form that these people could do anything. Or, for all I know, maybe there's a legitimate gripe about the way the thing was filed. I have no idea. And if you're trying to be fair, I guess you got to wait and see. But why aren't we bothering to be fair? We know who we're dealing with here. That's not an abortion. It is an abortion. No, I say it isn't. Well, I say it is. Well, God says that I should say that it's not an abortion. And you can't argue with God. I don't think God said that. I think you're making that up. How dare you? Freedom of religion. Now you're attacking me for my religion. Outrageous. You're just like the Taliban. No, wait a minute. You're just like the Taliban. No, you're the one attacking me for my religion. I'm not attacking you for your religion. I'm saying it's ridiculous for you to stand there and say God spoke to you personally and told you to say that that wasn't an abortion even though it was. Why would God tell you anything? Why would God tell you, of all things, that that wasn't an abortion when it really was one? I don't know. Strange and mysterious ways. What can I tell you? The point is you're violating my religious freedom by telling me that it's ridiculous for me to say that God spoke to me personally to redefine this thing as not that thing. I mean, I don't know. What do we do with a person like that? So now the legal review remains open. That's good news. The story of the young girl who traveled to Indiana for an abortion was first revealed by Bernard in an Indy Star story published earlier this month. So the doctor actually, I guess, told the story. And interestingly, I'm sure it was like, oh my God, what a ridiculous case this is. Everyone needs to know that these things are real and that these are the real life consequences of these fantasyland abortion laws. Everybody thinks that they know what's going on in the world of abortion and pregnancy, but there's always something that will surprise you. And you'll also be surprised by the number of people who are totally taken by surprise. A 10-year-old, how could that even happen? I don't know, but things like that do happen. You know, I guess I would analogize it, and I'm always in dangerous territory when I'm making analogies, and thankfully the room has cleared of production staff because she would jump in and say, don't make an analogy, you're terrible at these analogies. But it's like the gun people with this is a hoax, a 2-year-old can't pull the trigger. I can show you 100 times in the past year where a 2-year-old specifically pulled the trigger. And you wish. If you could show me half a dozen in a year, half a dozen in 5 years, I'd be shocked. Well, prepare to be shocked. And I proceeded to show them that. And then they say, yeah, well, there's all sorts of anecdotal evidence. But, well, that's what you asked for. You asked for 6 in the past 5 years. That's pretty anecdotal as evidence goes. But I can provide you with 100 in the past, or whatever it was. I think I said dozens or two dozen in the past year. I had this actual argument on Twitter fairly recently. And then I can produce it, and you say, you didn't think there was half a dozen in 5 years. I gave you 2 dozen in 1 year. You're wrong by a factor of whatever the hell that is enough factor. If somebody do the math on it, it's very easy. I think I did it on the fly on Twitter, but I can't do it on the radio. And, okay, well, you owe me one expression of surprise or shock, right? Well, fine, but it doesn't prove anything. They're all just anomalies. Well, it's an anomaly that happens all the time, all over the place. This is only one of the 10-year-old girls who does, and, or have had that happen to them who've done this. Well, anyway, where were we? We were talking about why the doctor would even speak up with this story, and she must be wondering now, why did I do that? Although I think she's right, and she's probably convinced that she's right because the truth is bearing her out. But there must have been some regret somewhere along the line, like, it was the right thing to do, but boy, am I paying the price for it. So where were we? The story of the young girl who traveled to Indiana was first revealed by Dr. Bernard in an Indy Star story published earlier this month. The story went viral and quickly became a talking point for abortion rights supporters, including President Joe Biden. Abortion opponents and some news outlets, however, questioned the veracity of the story. Oh, yes, and that reminds me, I think, was it this story? I think so, unless I'm conflating this with other stories, and that's easily done. But the doubters also pulling out other catchphrases. If the hearsay one won't work because there's no court proceeding going on yet, so we can't do the hearsay thing. And somebody made a great comment about what it was. It must have been like watching the gears turn in Republican heads on this story. Well, it's hearsay. No, that's stupid. That doesn't work in this situation. It's abortion. She was a slut. She had it coming to her. Oh, she's 10. Well, probably can't use that one either. And then they thought they were safe. The guy who did it was an illegal immigrant. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know, but it's a brilliant distraction. It would never have happened if it wasn't for, Joe Biden and open borders. Well, all right. That's not provable, but okay. I mean, maybe we can settle on that as a great distraction. But I guess this kept going, and they kept thinking of other things that they could use by way of distractions. And I think what they came up with then was, it's a poorly sourced story. It's based on a single source with a bias. And, what you mean, the doctor that performed she has a bias. Yes, she's biased in favor of abortion rights. Okay, yes, probably true. Single source, all right, but who said it? Was it Judd Legum, maybe, that had said it and tweeted the other day something like, if you have a problem, if you hate stories with a single source, a single biased source, and think that those things shouldn't be reported, wait till I tell you about police reporting and how that works. That's kind of the whole deal. Not only just actually filing a police report, that sort of paperwork thing, but reporting in the papers about what the police say. If you're a reporter on the police beat, almost everything you're reporting is coming from a single biased source. But that's supposed to be awesome, solid ground reporting, even though, gosh, they keep getting caught lying about so many things. Anyway, there you have it. I just thought that was kind of an interesting comment. So the abortion opponents and some news outlets have questioned the veracity of the story, presumably based on that claim. It's a single source. The announcement of criminal charges on Tuesday shifted the focus of abortion opponents away from questioning the story and onto whether or not Bernard had made the proper disclosures, which she did, so then they went to the illegal alien thing. Indiana law requires healthcare providers to report abortions they perform to the Indiana Department of Health, including whether the patient indicated they were seeking an abortion as a result of being abused, coerced, harassed, or trafficked. Failure to do so is a misdemeanor. And, their arrest, pull her licensure. It is a misdemeanor, guys. Bernard filed the required abortion disclosure, known as a terminated pregnancy form, on July 2nd, 2 days after she performed the girl's abortion, according to a copy of the form Indy Star received Thursday from the state health department. State law requires the forms to be filed within 3 days for patients under age 16. The form shows Bernard indicated the girl was seeking an abortion as a result of being abused. Kathleen Delaney, an attorney for Bernard, said in a statement that her client, quote, took every appropriate and proper action in accordance with the law and both her medical and ethical training as a physician. And so therefore, I add, we should be beating the people who were spreading this rumor and kicking them through the gutters of the streets of Indianapolis. But I don't advocate for violence. That's nonviolence. That's how I see it. That's not an abortion, and what I just told you to do to those people is not violence. And it's A-okay, right? I mean, that's where we are in the world. She followed all relevant policies, procedures, and regulations in this case, just as she does every day, to provide the best care possible for her patients, Delaney said. She has not violated any law, including patient privacy laws, which there are others who would run up against that. She has not violated any law, including patient privacy laws. She has not been disciplined by her employer. We are considering legal action against those who have smeared my client, including Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita, and know that the facts will all come out in due time. Columbus, Ohio police, meanwhile, said they were made aware of the girl's rape on June 22nd through a referral by Franklin County Children's Services that was made by her mother. Bernard has said she was contacted about the abortion 5 days later on June 27th. The abortion took place on June 30th. There's the answer for that. Just 6 days after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The court's decision allowed an Ohio law to go into effect, restricting abortions after what they call fetal cardiac activity, which it turns out is probably not actually cardiac activity, is detected, which is typically around 6 weeks. The form that Bernard filed with the state shows the girl was 6 weeks pregnant at the time of her abortion. The form indicates the doctor did not know the age of the, and I like that they put this here, quote, in scare quotes, father. Interesting. In such cases, doctors are required to enter an approximate age. According to a person familiar with the electronic filing system, Bernard entered 17. Oh, wouldn't that be interesting? Oh, he's not 17. Falsified information. You're under arrest. Would that be the hook that they would use? Indy Star obtained copies of all pregnancy termination forms submitted to the state health department from June 24th, the day of the U.S. Supreme Court decision, until July 11th. The 10-year-old victim is among 7 patients younger than 18 who received abortion care in Indiana during that time period. She's also the youngest to receive care, and the only juvenile whose abortion was listed as a result of abuse, according to the documents. All told, Indiana doctors reported performing 144 abortions in that time period. That doesn't necessarily capture all of the abortions performed during that time period because the state gives doctors 30 days to submit the forms when the patient is 16 or older. So, interesting. Then laying out a timeline, I think it's all pretty clearly explained, though, by the narrative part of the story. So thank you, Darwin, for bringing that to our attention and giving us a chance to get some more detail about what's going on here. It's a hell of a situation. So what about that, by the way, when considering, what was it? Who was it? We were talking about, I'll have to go back. Catherine Glenn Foster. Thankfully, I have the screen paused on her giving testimony as her name, her paper temporary nameplate there. Catherine Glenn Foster. What about that dodge? What do you make of that? The idea that, well, we'll just simply say it's not abortion. Do you want to allow them that indulgence? Like, equitably, I say no. And I don't know whether it's a moral judgment or not, but certainly some part of me says, no, we ought not to allow that. But it also opened up an interesting possibility. I mean, it won't work with them because they're simply, uninterested in dealing with anything on a, normal, logical, earthly basis. Ultimately, if you can rely in the end by saying, well, God told me I should not be bound by that rule. And if you tell me that you don't think God spoke to me, that's a violation of my religious freedom, something. Well, you're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to be worth arguing. But what if there were logic involved in all of this? If Catherine Glenn Foster can sit there, I was going to say stand there, but she's seated for this, sit there and say it's perfectly reasonable for her to say that the abortion that took place in Indiana was not an abortion, and the reason it's not an abortion isn't that it didn't terminate a pregnancy, but rather that it bothers her that she's opposed to all abortion, and while she recognizes, I guess, at some level, the necessity of this abortion having been performed, but if she admits that, then the hardest of the hardcore of her group will say, she's no longer the leader of our group. She shouldn't be the one there testifying. Apparently she's enjoying testifying and being in that position, and that's something she doesn't want to lose, and she could lose it if she tells the truth about what she's thinking about this situation. So instead she says, well, if you perform one of these medical procedures that ends a pregnancy on a 10-year-old girl who's been raped, clearly that's a necessary procedure. And since it's necessary, I want to say that I would allow it to take place. But because it's also an abortion, I can't say that. Because if I say I would allow an abortion to take place, I lose my position as the leader of this anti-abortion movement that has elevated me to whatever position it is that finds me now testifying before Congress and pretending to be an important and serious person. So instead, I will say that was a not abortion. And that's ridiculous, and that's the sort of thing that should rule you out as the leader of anything or as a serious enough person to testify before Congress about anything. But there she is. No, that's a non-abortion. Why? Because I say so. and that occurred to me, what's happening here is because I identify, essentially, they love to make this joke about this when they're making snide comments about transgenderism and non-binaryism, that, I identify as somebody who doesn't believe in people identifying. I said, what are you going to do about that? Oh my gosh, you've got me in a logical trap. You're not really a person who identifies that way. But right now you are a person who identifies that thing as not abortion, and that should be no more logical to you than you think transgenderism or non-binarism or non-genderism is. You can't simply say that a biological male is a female because they identify as female, they frequently say. All right, supposing you were right about that, doesn't that mean that you can't simply say that that's not an abortion because everybody knows that it is? And the answer to that one is, well, no, because God. All right. Well, then I guess there's no winning. I mean, we could, of course, just say, well, this person gets to identify their own gender because God. No, it can't be because God, because everyone knows God said there were two genders. I don't know that. I heard something different. I heard that person say that God told them that there were as many genders as they wanted, or at least enough to accommodate whatever it is that they want in their life. Or as I happened to be flipping through the channels, channel surfing yesterday, watching a story about two transgender teens who I guess you could say had swapped genders, not intentionally. They had done this beforehand and identified as I was going to say the opposite gender, but that's the old way of saying it. But okay, they chose the gender that was traditionally considered the opposite of the gender at which they had been assigned at birth. I think that's the proper terminology. And they were dating now, and it wasn't a matter of, they didn't do this in order to date. They did this and then found each other at a support group and then found, hey, we have things in common. So it's not, nothing for the Republicans to latch onto other than the transgender angle of this whole thing. But it was an interesting comment that actually one of the parents had made, saying that the kid had told them about this thing. So it's hearsay. You can't admit it into evidence. Although maybe it fits under one of the exceptions. The present sense impression at the time. But the child saying, well, I've always felt out of sorts and out of place in the body that I was born into, but they said that maybe God made a mistake, which of course the Bible people would say, well, God doesn't make mistakes, so that's entirely impossible. Well, then the only other conclusion to reach is that God meant for this person to be transgender. Well, that can't be it either. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know. I think that maybe at this point, an hour into it, I should probably be done with this story. But it is an amazing, fascinating, multi-layered story. I'm sure more will develop. Maybe we've missed a couple of things, but I think I got it. A lot of the things that were bugging me about the story for most of the morning. And what an interesting thing it would be. Now, I don't know which way we should come down on this one. If we make room for, like, could the tables be turned, though, by the way? Could Republicans say, they certainly will try, well, if you want us to believe your claims about gender being a construct, well, then you have to maybe you might be logically compelled to at least explore the possibility that the construct of abortion is manufactured as well, and maybe subject to a different understanding than we traditionally have had. And I suppose at the outset, if you thought you were having, reasoned discourse with people in good faith, you might give that a moment's thought. But there's not a whole lot of reason to believe that you are dealing with people who are, in fact, giving serious thought to things in the context of good faith debate. Anyway, one of the things that I saw mentioned, by the way, about Catherine Glenn Foster, and maybe I should look her up to see if that's who this person is, but I think I saw somebody say in a tweet somewhere that this Catherine Glenn Foster person was the author of the odd and disturbing line, anyway, in an op-ed that ran somewhere that I think may have referred to on the air, but I think it ran, oh gosh, I don't remember which of the crazy papers, whether it was a crazy paper of record or a crazy paper elsewhere. I'm just not sure. But an op-ed that had something about, made some reference to ectopic pregnancies, but speaking about it in terms of like, about an ectopic pregnancy that's carried to term. And it was like, there's no such thing. That's not, or delivered a baby, an ectopic pregnancy baby. Like, no one's ever done that before because it's impossible. This is one of those things that keeps coming up, is that anti-abortion advocates keep saying that it is possible and that you don't need to have abortions in the case of an ectopic pregnancy because they can just transplant the embryo into the uterus and everything will go on fine from there. Except that technology doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. And yeah, the only end of an ectopic pregnancy is a rupture of the fallopian tube that very frequently will kill the woman. So, it's an issue, and you can't just transplant it. But this op-ed referred to it, and then somebody said that maybe it was Catherine Glenn Foster was the author of the op-ed. I don't remember, because I do remember specifically that the screen grabs of that piece circulated without the byline on the thing, and I think it was intentional, and they didn't want to give attention to the person who did it. But yeah, I'm trying to think back, and it's been a couple of days since I had seen that, and I'm trying to think of what was the phrase that would let me search Twitter and find my own retweet about. There it is. Right, it was back on July 4th. Hey, happy Independence Day, everybody. So like 11 days ago, and I remember seeing someone else's tweet about it and saying, yeah, that's it. They use the phrase, a baby who is ectopic, which is not a thing. That I remember tweeting that. And Laura Chapin's tweet was one I picked up on. Hello, New York Times opinion. So I guess that's the answer where it ran, New York Times. I don't know who edited / signed off on this piece, but it should not have been published. There has never been an ectopic pregnancy delivered. Literally, never. They are not viable, and if not removed, the woman will die, with a couple of copies distributed to other advocates around the internets. But yeah, this is a screen grab that comes without the byline. But the text that's here, from a pro-life perspective, delivering a baby who is ectopic is closer to delivering a baby very prematurely, because the mother has life-threatening eclampsia. It's not like that at all, because a baby who is ectopic, it isn't even a fetus yet. It can't be, because if it was, it would already have ruptured the tubes and killed everybody. There's no babies who are ectopic. It's not a thing. They've never been transplanted. And delivering a baby very prematurely. Yeah, like what's full pregnancy is 40 weeks? So, there are, of course, the medical science makes it possible to save the life of a baby born extremely prematurely in the 20-something week zone, I think. Here she's saying it's like delivering a baby very prematurely. A baby delivered at 22 weeks may or may not survive. A baby delivered in the first trimester because of an ectopic pregnancy definitely won't survive. They at least acknowledge that, but there's no delivery. But in both cases, a pro-life doctor sees herself as delivering a child who is as much a patient as the mother. And I guess this is like I wonder if this was Catherine Glenn Foster, because this is like the seeds of this just redefining everything move that she pulls in front of Congress here. But by the way, delivering a baby who is ectopic, if that is a thing at all, if you take for granted, which you should not, that thing that is removed from the body, not delivered, but removed from the body surgically, is a baby, and you're delivering it extremely prematurely. You're talking about, like, Well, how premature was your baby? Was your baby born at like 28 weeks? I know that's very risky. Yeah, no, this is like 1 week. What? No, that it doesn't take very long for this to become a huge problem. I don't know the inside story of it. Not qualified to speak to it medically, but you're talking about something that's such an early stage of pregnancy that, well, in all likelihood, there's no visible indications. Very often, the women don't even know that they're pregnant at all. That's the case sometimes all the way through the entire pregnancy. But no, it's something like 22 weeks. It's like under 10 at a minimum, right? I mean, I think probably 10 is far too much. Here's where my knowledge runs into the wall here. I don't know how far along you can get with an ectopic pregnancy before you're hospitalized. You know, you're in pain and you're in the care of physicians because something is clearly wrong. And to refer to that as, well, that's just premature. No, that doesn't make any sense to say something like this. This is interesting. So I wonder if this is her. Maybe I could search up the text and find the actual article, and then we can know whether Catherine Glenn Foster was the author or not. Delivering a baby who is ectopic is what was it? Delivering a baby who is ectopic. And where do we get to? Here we go. New York Times. Here we are. In a post-Roe world, we can avoid pitting mothers against babies is the title of the piece. A guest essay in the opinion section of the New York Times on July 4th. And no, the answer is it was written by someone else who I guess is just engaged in the same semantic game as Catherine Glenn Foster. Leah Libresco Sargent, who is credited here as saying, Mrs. Sargent has written books about religion and community building and runs an online community that focuses on the dignity of dependence. The dignity of dependence. Interesting. Well, at any rate, the real issue, as I recall, in reading that part of it, I remember reading now that description and saying, well, you probably shouldn't have your religion writer writing about medical issues. But, of course, they see this as something other than a medical issue. And so you end up with lines about that. From a pro-life perspective, delivering a baby who is ectopic, which isn't a thing, it's closer to delivering a baby very prematurely because the mother has life-threatening eclampsia. That is to say, I guess what she's trying to say here is a pro-life doctor, despite the fact that they are performing an abortion because the pregnancy is ectopic and the only treatment for it is abortion. But I'm a pro-life doctor. Now, if you're pro-life enough, you'll say, well, I'm pro this woman's life as well. There are two people who will die here in the pro-life view of things, I guess. If you consider this embryo a person, then there's the pregnant person and the embryo, and both will die. And so the logical pro-life position here is say, well, we'll save one of the two. And this is an interesting, I guess it's their attempt at saying, yes, there's a pro-life way to perform this procedure. And if you feel bad about that, or if you disagree about that, well, what if I told you that the first one that this wasn't an abortion, that this is a delivery, just an unsuccessful one? Sometimes doctors try to assist in a delivery, and it doesn't work. I think this is the point that they're trying to make. A baby delivered at 22 weeks may or may not survive. A baby delivered in the first trimester because of an ectopic pregnancy definitely won't survive. That's definitely true. Although, again, you would say, calling it a baby, don't know. But in both cases, a pro-life doctor sees herself as delivering a child who is as much a patient as the mother, even though one will definitely die, and that's actually the intention. I mean, although, yeah, I guess the pro-life doctor here would say, that's not my intention. My intention is that they live. I just don't have magic. I can't make them live. They will die, but my intention is to save the life of the pregnant person here. I'm trying to use the right terminology. Then there's another paragraph here. A pro-life approach to ectopic pregnancy may countenance similar procedures, but still sees it as different from an approach that equates it to abortion. When a mother's life is threatened by the course of her pregnancy, there is a wide gulf between a culture that assumes she and her baby are pitted against each other and one in which both are valued. They're trying to express a very weird, weirdly nuanced position here, so I'll be somewhat sympathetic to it. But I wonder if that's just not the same logic in action that we see with Catherine Glenn Foster here saying, well, the thing is, that's not an abortion. I believe that's the same thing. Maybe that's why the two were thrown together in the tweet that I have seen and since lost. There's no way for me to recall that tweet. I don't remember enough about it to search it out. But that's the same logic, I guess, right? Well, this just isn't an abortion. And it isn't because I'm pro-life, and yet I had to perform this procedure, and in order to reconcile that for myself, I have to say what I was doing was delivering a baby extremely prematurely. I mean, but couldn't you say that about all abortions if you want to? I mean, I guess you could, right? If it's really just a matter of how the doctor feels about it, well then, okay, I'm delivering this baby. I'm delivering this baby with surgical instruments that usually people used to use for those things that they called abortions. And maybe it's totally inappropriate as a method of delivery and probably limits the likelihood that this extremely premature baby will live. But hey, those are the tools I have. That's what I'm using. All I've got is a hammer. Everything's a nail. But it's not an abortion. That's the good news. So, what is it? Well, it's a nail. I mean, look, I have a hammer in my hand. These are my delivery tools. Now, after all, aren't they OBGYNs who perform this? Yes? No? Okay. If not, make them OBGYNs and just say they're all deliveries. And now, what's her name here? Leah Libresco Sargent, and I guess Catherine Glenn Foster. They have to be satisfied because there's no way that they couldn't be. Because after all I have to do to satisfy them is at the end say, God told me that this was the real definition. And now you can't argue with me. Except, of course, that because they are gimmitarians at heart, it all comes back to that eventually, right? They can say, no, God only speaks to me. If he speaks to you, he, she, I don't know, pronouns, if the God speaks to you, then you're wrong because you're a wrong kind of person. You must have been hearing something else. It's the devil. It's the flying spaghetti monster. It's whatever it is. But it isn't God because that's the one that I'm hearing, you see. And I didn't hear them say that. So you're wrong. And that's why you can't deal with them and why you shouldn't try. And don't feel bad about not trying. So what about other things in the world? There are so many. For instance, I said things going on in Congress. And the thing that's going on in Congress that bothers everybody and that Joan would tell us about if she were here, although she might very well spend an hour on, just as we did, because it's a hell of a situation that's going on in this country and it touches on a lot. But what's going on in Congress? Joe Manchin is going on in Congress. And Joe Manchin is doing the Joe Manchin thing again. Apparently all the low-key reporting of an imminent deal on something important and not vast and far-reaching as originally planned necessarily, but touching on, deficit reduction, taxes on corporations and the wealthy perhaps increasing, some climate action, some Affordable Care Act subsidy extensions, etc., that Joe Manchin was in careful negotiations with leadership over, have blown up again because something, and what do you know, Joe Manchin is at the center of another blow up of a long-standing series of negotiations that will result in virtually nothing being passed. Wow, what a surprise. The New York Times perhaps gives us some one view of what's going on. Loath to trust the New York Times to give us the one and only view on it, but that's where we'll start. How one senator, Joe Manchin, doomed the Democrats' climate plan. I can't believe it. And as somebody commented the other day, that other day being yesterday, and I'll have to go back to my Twitter feed to find. I can't put every tweet that I like or retweet in pocket. It's just becomes unmanageable. But others saying, yeah, by the way, this is another indication that progressives, in fact, have had it right all along. Leah Greenberg, co-executive director of Indivisible, commenting, back in the spring of 2021, progressives said if you gave Manchin everything he wanted in the BIF, the infrastructure program, and then asked him nicely to pass Build Back Better, BBB, that he'd screw you. And they were right all along. It's awfully hard to argue with that, right? That was in response to Jeff Stein from the Washington Post tweeting his breaking story. Manchin tells Dem leaders that climate and tax hikes are out of the ever-shrinking economic package that he's willing to negotiate. Deficit reduction, prescription drug reform, and ACA subsidies believed, anyway, to still be in play. So how do you like that? Well, over at the New York Times, they describe things this way. How Senator Joe Manchin III of West Virginia led his party and his president through months of tortured talks with nothing to show for it as the planet dangerously heats up. You get the sense of the difficulty here. Coral Davenport and Lisa Friedman are the byline getters on this one. First, it says he killed a plan that would have forced power plants to clean up their climate warming pollution. Then, that was his idea, I'm sure, from the beginning, he shattered an effort to help consumers pay for electric vehicles. And finally, he said he could not support government incentives for solar and wind companies or any of the other provisions that the rest of his party and his president say are vital to ensure a livable planet. Thanks a lot. Senator Joe Manchin III of West Virginia, who took more campaign cash from the oil and gas industry than any other senator, and who became a millionaire from his family coal business. And remember, his family business, or his business anyway, was actually carpets until he found himself in public office. And then found out there was a way to arrange something better and more lucrative for himself through coal. Independently blew up the Democratic Party's legislative plans to fight climate change. The swing Democratic vote in an evenly divided Senate, Mr. Manchin led his party through months of tortured negotiations that collapsed Thursday night. A year-long wild goose chase. This is really something for the New York Times. A year-long wild goose chase that produced nothing as the earth warms to dangerous levels. It seems odd that Manchin would choose as his legacy to be the one man who single-handedly doomed humanity. Doesn't seem odd, don't you think? Said John Podesta, a former senior counsel to President Barack Obama and founder of the Center for American Progress, a left-leaning think tank. Privately, Senate Democratic staff members seethed and sobbed on Thursday night after more than a year of working nights and weekends to scale back, water down, trim, and tailor the climate legislation to Mr. Manchin's exact specifications, only to have it rejected inches from the finish line. It brings, of course, to mind Lucy and the football, but I have questioned the applicability of that analogy all along. Oh, well, not all along, but very recently, and since then, consistently. Rage keeps me from tears. Senator Edward Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts and longtime advocate for climate legislation, wrote on Twitter late Thursday, Mr. Manchin's refusal to support the climate legislation, along with steadfast Republican opposition, effectively dooms the chances that Congress will pass any new law to tackle global warming for the foreseeable future. At a moment when scientists say the planet is nearly out of time to prevent average global temperatures from rising 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That is the threshold beyond which the likelihood of catastrophic droughts, floods, fires, and heat waves increases significantly. The planet has already warmed an average of about 1.1 degrees Celsius. A poll conducted in early May by the Pew Research Center found a majority of Americans, 58%, think the federal government is doing too little to reduce the effects of global warming, while 22% said it's doing the right amount, and 18% said it's doing too much. In the same survey, 71% said their community had been hit by extreme weather in the past year, and a majority linked it to climate change. President Biden has pledged to the rest of the world that the United States, the country that has historically pumped the most greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, would cut its emissions in half by 2030. Without legislation, it will be impossible to meet Mr. Biden's climate goals. We are not going to meet our targets, period, said Leah Stokes, a professor of environmental policy at the University of Santa Barbara in California, who has advised congressional Democrats on climate legislation. I honestly don't know how he is going to look his own grandchildren in the eyes, she said of Mr. Manchin. At the start of this week, Mr. Manchin said his top concern was the price at the pump and the need for more fossil fuels. How do we bring down the price of gasoline, he said, from the energy thing, but you can't do it unless you produce more. If there's people that don't want to produce more fossil, then you got a problem. That's just reality. You got to do it. Of course, another way to do it is to not have so many people need gasoline. What about reducing demand for gasoline? That might actually work. But hey, never mind that. On Wednesday, after data was released showing the nation's inflation rate at 9.1%, the highest in a year, Mr. Manchin said in a statement, "No matter what spending aspirations some in Congress may have, it is clear to anyone who visits a grocery store or a gas station that we cannot add any more fuel to this inflation fire." So use less fuel. Sam Runyon, a spokeswoman for Mr. Manchin, declined to discuss his position on Thursday night, adding that the senator has not walked away from the table or had an abortion, because that was not an abortion, and this is not a table. But people involved in the talk said they believed he had reached the end of the line. White House officials did not respond to several calls on Thursday night. For a year and a half, climate activists have described themselves as Charlie Brown to Mr. Manchin's Lucy. Several times, they neared what many Democrats believe could be a deal, only to see Mr. Manchin yank away his support at the final moment. But perhaps they should have seen this coming. Mr. Manchin once ran a campaign advertisement in which he shot a bullet hole through Mr. Obama's climate plan. So, when Mr. Biden took office, vowing to enact some of the most ambitious climate change in the nation's history, most ambitious plan anyway, he knew Mr. Manchin would be his biggest obstacle. Biden and Senate Democrats approached Manchin at the outset last spring as the White House began writing a sweeping $2 trillion spending and social policy bill that included health care and climate action. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and chair of the Senate Finance Committee reached out to his West Virginia colleague. Wyden was charged with writing the core of the climate legislation, about $300 billion in tax credits for producers and consumers of wind and solar power and buyers of electric vehicles. It would be the single biggest, or largest rather, expenditure by the United States to fight climate change. Wyden sought Manchin's input to shape the tax package in such a way that the West Virginian would support it. Manchin obliged. He told Wyden to rewrite the package according to his specifications so that the tax credits could be used for nuclear energy and carbon capture and sequestration, a nascent technology that has so far not proved commercially viable, but that could theoretically allow power plants that burn coal, oil, or gas to continue to operate without climate warming emissions. The changes were less than climate friendly, but Wyden agreed to them, saying he believed it would help secure Manchin's support. At the same time, other Democrats were crafting an even more ambitious climate provision for the bill, known as a clean energy standard that would have paid electric utilities to replace coal and gas-fired power plants and penalized those that didn't. In a private memo signed last summer with Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the majority leader, Mr. Manchin, the chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, secured control over the design of this program. But by October, Manchin had backed out of the clean energy standard, saying he could not support any version. Democrats deleted the entire proposal. Then in December, Manchin pulled out of negotiations altogether, saying he could not vote for the overall spending package. Talks were dead for months. Manchin and other Democrats left open the possibility of a future deal based on the $300 billion in tax credits for renewable energy and electric vehicles, but Manchin also insisted that spending be cut and that fossil fuels be included. Those demands grew more vociferous as winter turned to spring and Russia's war against Ukraine rocked energy markets and gas prices soared. Russia's invasion of Ukraine gave Manchin a huge new bargaining authority, and as did record inflation, said Paul Bledsoe, a strategic advisor at the Progressive Policy Institute. That, he said, changed the dynamic. Over the past weeks, Democrats thought they were finally nearing an agreement on the climate package with Manchin, but he still had demands. He wanted to eliminate billions of dollars in electric vehicle tax credits. He wanted to rework the clean energy tax package that he had fashioned with Wyden, gutting a plan to give developers of clean energy direct payments up front instead of tax credits they could recoup after their investment. Schumer conceded to every request and more, staffers said. Up until Thursday morning, the majority leader thought a deal was possible, according to climate activists who spoke with Schumer later that night. The White House made concessions to Manchin as well. This month, the Interior Department offered the possibility of 11 new offshore oil and gas lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska, despite Biden's campaign promise to end new drilling in federal waters, which two administration officials described as an effort to appease Mr. Manchin. The White House was also weighing whether to allow a path for other fossil fuel projects like a gas pipeline in West Virginia in order to gain Manchin's vote. The administration delayed federal rules to address methane, mercury, and other pollutants from oil and gas facilities so as not to anger Mr. Manchin during delicate negotiations. That's 2 years of lost time in a regulatory process that can be lengthy. Activists say they felt suckered. Who could blame them? And we would love to tell you exactly how they felt suckered, but it's time for a break.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We really need to sum this up. There is a good point being made in the remainder of the article, though, so let's race through a little bit. We'll skip a little bit ahead here. The collapse of negotiations with Mr. Manchin comes 2 weeks after the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court limited the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to regulate carbon emissions from power plants. The decision left intact the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, but blocked any attempt by the agency to write regulations so broad that they forced the closure of coal-fired plants, which generate the most carbon dioxide, or compel utilities to switch to wind, solar, and other clean sources from fossil fuels. In other words, this is reminder here that the Supreme Court has basically said that if you want to do some of these ambitious things, it has to be Congress that mandates it specifically. It can't be the using the regulatory process at the agencies that directs these policies. So essentially, it's now more important than ever under this precedent, if it stands forever, that that Congress act, and that without action, there can be no policy change that will lead towards emissions reductions. So now with action being more urgent than ever, I guess that's where Manchin decides to exit from the action arena. Well, if it's actually can only happen this way, now that we've closed off the avenue for the EPA to do it, it's all up to me? Oh, okay. Well, I don't want it done, so I guess I'll just walk out. So there you have it. The court ruling combined with the blockage in Congress still leaves the administration with a few avenues to cut climate warming pollution, although they will not be enough to meet Mr. Biden's targets. If you're wondering what they are, the EPA still plans to issue tougher regulations to control methane, a potent greenhouse gas that leaks from oil and gas wells, and it plans stricter limits on other types of pollution generated by power plants such as mercury, smog, and soot. The idea is that cracking down on these pollutants could force electric utilities to clean up or shut down the dirtiest facilities such as coal-burning power plants. And remember, of course, that we did learn that Joe Manson's personal fortune not only comes from coal-burning power plants, his coal operations, but that he leveraged his position inside the West Virginia state legislature to legalize the use of the dirtiest and most inefficient type of coal garbage that basically is ordinarily thrown out by coal mines as worthless, but you can burn it, and if you burn enough of this horrific crap that also produces more garbage in the atmosphere than ordinary coal by far, then you can produce some power out of it. It's just, one, terribly inefficient, and two, would likely have been against the law in West Virginia but for Manchin leveraging his position inside of state government to keep it legal, make it legal, and then, but with a special dispensation for just a certain few coal plants around his home, or his home area anyway. Why he would do this in his own area, I don't know. But basically creating a market for this garbage coal that he cornered, and it can't get any bigger because no one else can burn the stuff, and basically no one else is interested in moving into this micro market for this garbage coal anyway. So he just legislated himself into being a millionaire. And, you know, of course it's never enough. Right now, his daughter has done pretty well for herself in the pharmaceutical industry. Guy lives on a houseboat / yacht, however you want to describe it, and drives around in what? Was it a Maserati that they said he drove? I can't even remember. Anyway, you know, I don't know how old he is, but you could probably stop now and either just, you know, shut off that. It's all right. Pull that ladder up behind you. That would be fine. There don't have to be generations of people making money off of the same thing. Couldn't your kids be in cryptocurrency and pharmaceuticals and just be fine with that? No? Anyway, where were we? The EPA still plans to do this stuff on mercury, smog, soot, methane, etc., as the administration intends also to tighten limits on emissions from vehicle tailpipes, although many of the same litigants who were successful in the power plant case in the Supreme Court are expected to challenge tougher tailpipe standards too. So anyway, lots of horrific things coming from this, but just thought I'd update you on what was happening legislatively, that is to say nothing. Another hodgepodge of stories. Why don't we spend the last couple minutes of the week trying to raise awareness of a couple other smaller bore stories, some of which are the import of which may be huge, but well, let's say we can only give them a couple minutes each. How about that? Let's see. There is news that the Secret Service has made a mockery of itself, in addition to I guess the Tony Ornato story, where he got transferred from the Secret Service to Deputy Chief of Staff for Oval Office operations, or whatever they call it, in the Trump administration, and was weirdly crossing that line back and forth between law enforcement / protective services and White House political operation. That seems quite odd. And now there's more news that the Secret Service has done some weird things. CNN reporting yesterday, Secret Service erased text messages from January 5th and January 6th, 2021. And this after, of course, oversight officials asked for those texts. Oh, you want the texts from January 5th and 6th? Okay. Oh, I just erased them. Gosh, and it was from planned maintenance. That's the claim here. Jamie Gangel, I don't know. Zachary Cohen, Ryan Nobles for CNN, reporting the U.S. Secret Service erased text messages from January 5th and 6th, shortly after they were requested by oversight officials investigating the agency's response to the U.S. Capitol riot, according to a letter given to the House Select Committee investigating the insurrection and obtained by CNN. The letter, which was originally sent to the House and Senate Homeland Security Committees by the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General, said the messages were erased from the system as part of a device replacement program after the watchdog asked the agency for records related to its electronic communications. First, the department notified us that many U.S. Secret Service text messages from January 5th and 6th were erased as part of a device replacement program. The Secret Service erased those text messages after the Office of Inspector General requested records of electronic communications from the Secret Service as part of our evaluation of events at the Capitol on January 6th. The letter from DHS IG Joseph Kufari stated. Second, DHS personnel have repeatedly told OIG inspectors that they were not permitted to provide records directly to OIG, and that such records had to first undergo review by DHS attorneys, Kufari added. This review led to a weeks-long delay in OIG obtaining records and created confusion over whether all records had been produced. The Intercept was the first to report the DHS IG letter. The Homeland Security Inspector General did not immediately respond to CNN's request for comment. The Secret Service pushed back on the allegations in a statement, saying the insinuation that the Secret Service maliciously deleted text messages following a request is false. In fact, the Secret Service has been fully cooperating with the OIG in every respect, whether it be interviews, documents, emails, or texts. But it feels like maybe they're not. I don't know how viable the excuse of device replacement plan is, but I also don't know why we don't simply operate with the assumption that the jury's entitled to take away the worst possible assumption from this. If you are asked to preserve evidence and you delete it after the request is made anyway, then you should be allowed to say, yeah, you can take that to mean that you bet they knew that that was incriminating information and that they intentionally deleted it so that you wouldn't be able to have it in front of you. But now that it's been destroyed, you're entitled to assume the worst about it. Now, is that fair? Well, we don't know, of course, what that information was. It could have been benign information, but, I mean, that's the strongest possible disincentive to be flippant about compliance with requests for preserving evidence, right? If you know ahead of time, well, look, you could destroy this evidence if you want to, but it's only going to end up meaning that the jury will be entitled to assume the worst about that evidence, then you might as well turn it over. If it's anything other than an admission of your guilt, you're better off turning over the information. Even if it is an admission of your guilt, you're probably better off turning over the information because then you can at least debate about the meaning and nuance of the texts. But if you destroy it, then, the idea should be incentivizing saving the information and providing it to investigators, because the worst possible outcome is coming from destroying it. And if it's destroyed by accident, bad news for you. Be more vigilant about preserving your records. That should be your main focus. I think I don't even know. Maybe in criminal practice, there's something quite like that. I couldn't tell you. I don't do that. But it's a choice that we can make, a policy decision that we can make about destruction of evidence, that if we do permit it, I just don't seem to see it exercised very often. We're all running around pretending that there's nothing we can do about Donald Trump because he flushed all the evidence down the toilet. Well, the fact that we flushed evidence down the toilet means you should be able to assume that that was evidence of wrongdoing, not just a guilty conscience. But I don't know. Apparently we don't do those things, at least not in practice. All right, let's see. Other things I need to bring to your attention the fact that Sri Lanka is in crisis. And I bring lots of places are in crisis, but I bring this one up because when I saw the information tweeted around, there were lots of people saying we're about 10 seconds away from having this happen in this country. In Sri Lanka, the bits and pieces of information that I was able to pick up from Twitter without further investigation, large-scale protests in the streets and anger about the, inability of the government to impress upon what the wealthy sector contributes in terms of its taxes, and widespread suffering among the economic underclasses. And guess what happened? They marched through the streets, and there was video of them basically accosting and attacking any wealthy people that they could get their hands on, culminating in a storming of the presidential palace and video of people breaking in and swimming in the swimming pool at the presidential palace. The president having vacated the place and now having stepped down from office. But what's going on there that's driving all of that? I thought I'd grab the BBC's article, Sri Lanka, why is the country in an economic crisis? See if we can figure that out quickly, and keep an eye then afterwards on exactly what's going on here. Ayesha Pereira, or I think I've pronounced that something close to correct, for BBC, reporting what has been happening in Sri Lanka. Question and answer format here. Protests started in the capital, Colombo, in April and spread across the country. People have been struggling with daily power cuts and shortages of basics such as fuel, food, and medicines. Inflation is running at more than 50%. They illustrate that helpfully with a chart here. The country doesn't have enough fuel for essential services like buses, trains, and medical vehicles. And officials say it doesn't have enough foreign currency to import more. This lack of fuel has caused petrol and diesel prices, remember petrol, it's BBC, to rise dramatically. In late June, the government banned the sale of petrol and diesel for non-essential vehicles for 2 weeks. Sales of fuel remain severely restricted. Schools have closed. People have been asked to work from home to help conserve supplies. What happens when a country runs out of money, as they have declared bankruptcy? Well, Sri Lanka is then left unable to buy the goods that it needs from abroad. And in May, it failed to make an interest payment on its foreign debt for the first time in history. Failure to pay debt interest can damage a country's reputation with investors, making it harder to borrow the money that it needs for trading in international markets. This, of course, can further harm confidence in its currency and economy. What's the plan to tackle the crisis? The President Rajapaksa resigned after fleeing to Singapore. Before stepping down, he made Prime Minister Ranil, Wickremesinghe, acting president. Oh boy, we get to have an actual acting Sri Lankan president. Our acting president has declared a state of emergency across the country and imposed a curfew in the western province while he tries to stabilize the situation. But on Wednesday, hundreds of protesters stormed his office amid calls for his resignation. The president's departure threatens a potential power vacuum, of course. It needs a functioning government in order to tackle the financial crisis. So this gives you general background on, just what's going on and what the problems are that they're facing that have driven people out into the street. But the more important part, I thought, the more interesting part, was it simply got to that's it. We can't take it anymore. We're going to show up in the street to protest. And then, by the way, maybe just bust our way into the presidential palace and avail ourselves of some of the amenities that the rich people don't seem to have to do without the way we do. Very interesting and something to keep an eye on, to be sure. Another a smaller story. That's not really a small story. That's a whole country in crisis. So, no. But I would say, given an equal amount of ink here in this country, an actual small story, but still somewhat interesting. I'll grab this version from the Daily Beast. But you may have heard about this story when it was first reported. Probably not, because it's a pretty small bore story. But MAGA fan accused of setting fire to his own van after blaming Biden supporters and Black Lives Matter. Somebody who vandalized their own property, took pictures of it and said, oh my gosh, I'm a victim of these horrible leftist fascists. And everybody pretty much knew right away. Yeah. Antifa is not going to show up and spray paint Biden 2020 on your garage door. Antifa, to the extent that they exist at all, and they're certainly not an organized group, but to the extent there are such people, obviously, and besides people who are just freelance anti-fascists. But they're not like huge Biden supporters, really. They would want to be rid of Trump, to be sure, but not really big Biden supporters. And then, of course, there's also BLM spray painted on this garage as well. Also not really something people are likely to show up and spray paint. And if you're going to take the time to spray paint on somebody's door, probably a more cogent message than just BLM. And then, of course, this is the most interesting part to me. What I guess is supposed to be their view of an anarchy sign, which, you know, if you grew up in the day and you recognize it, the A in the circle, but only barely in the circle, like the way I always saw it drawn. It was, I mean, as though it embodied the anarchy itself. I'm drawing outside the lines. A true anarchist would not recognize this circle as a limitation on the space which the A can occupy. But instead, these other guys have taken away this other view of it. And I guess when you're forging the stuff, for whatever reason, I say this because this is the second time I've seen this, is somebody draws the A and it's all entirely enclosed in the circle, as though it were like a superhero's logo or like a C, like a copyright symbol inside of a circle. The A is enclosed. That's when you know that anarchists didn't paint this. And I say it comes up again because I'll read you this story. This is a guy in Minneapolis. A Minneapolis man told cops he'd been the victim of a terrifying, politically motivated attack in the heat of the 2020 presidential race. His camper van was set on fire because it displayed a Trump flag, and the flames had spread to engulf other vehicles and his garage, which itself had been spray painted with graffiti supporting Joe Biden and Black Lives Matter just weeks after local police killed George Floyd. Investigators have now concluded that he staged the whole thing. Dennis Malla, 29, from Brooklyn Center, has been charged with 2 counts of wire fraud over the incident in September of 2020. Malla told KARE 11 he'd chased 3 people out of his yard the night of the fire, and one of them had dropped a box of matches during the pursuit. Because that's what they usually use, a little box of wooden matches. No flamethrowers or butane torches or anything. When he returned home, he found his camper ablaze. Messages that said Biden 2020 and BLM and a symbol believed to be associated with Antifa. That's the A in the circle, which is really supposed to be associated with anarchy, which is really more of a like, hey, fun teenagers saying, oh, anarchy. Anarchy means that you can't, get me in trouble for smoking at school. Well, there's more to it than that, but okay, that's the fun version of it. But it's an A, so they think, oh, Antifa. Anyway, all this was scrolled across his garage door, which was also being destroyed by the inferno. Mola even claimed he'd rescued 4 sleeping puppies from inside the garage. How dare you endanger my puppies? But law enforcement say his noble story is bull. Yeah, that's right. I should have used... I have Greg's pre-censored version of it. Right? Yeah, but that's just the beep, not the fun horn. But he says it apparently turns out to be, just that. And Mola has been indicted for submitting over $300,000 in bogus insurance claims and received around $61,000 from his insurance company. Better still, a fundraiser set up to support him after he suffered what the page calls a hate crime led him to receiving over $17,000 in donations, court documents show. Dennis is the father of 2 young children, a hardworking man, devoted man of God, who broke one of the main commandments there, and a vocal supporter of President Donald Trump, the fundraiser description said. Dennis installed a Trump flag and Trump 2020 flag on his truck, and due to the spray paint left on his garage door, Biden 2020 BLM, it's believed he was the target for his patriotic support of our president. Mola's alleged staged hate crime came the year after actor Jussie Smollett, remember him, pretended to have been targeted in a hate crime by assailants shouting their support for Trump in Chicago. I guess that is the Daily Beast's homage to both sidesing it, but I'm going to one-up them and say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to go back and give you more from the other side because I don't think the 2 things really should have been compared. To me, what this brought to mind was Nancy Mace at some point about the same time, also claimed to have had her property vandalized and that people had spray painted on her sidewalk. And that she felt that her life had been threatened because somebody had spray painted something on her sidewalk. But what was interesting was, just like with this, at the time when this story broke, I know people said, that looks fake. I bet that guy did it to himself. But he did set his garage on fire. That seems kind of dumb. And his camper. But okay, now it turns out just to have been a fake insurance scam. But what struck me was that stupid A all the way inside the circle is also seen on Nancy Mace's sidewalk, which at the time suggested to me that, again, that this had been done by somebody who doesn't know what the symbol actually is supposed to look like, i.e. maybe Nancy Mace herself, for instance, to drum up sympathy and support, though she didn't, not guilty of any wire fraud, I don't think, unless maybe she fundraised off that, and maybe that's wire fraud. Anyway, just interesting to note that the same fake A symbol was at both sites. I don't think the same person did them. I just think the same type of person did them. The dumb type. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that one into the mix for the week. And I'll see if I can come up with that Nancy Mace story too. But that reminded me that had happened. And let's see, there are a couple other things. And I think if I scroll down, there was something else that made me say, oh, yes, I definitely should bring that up. Oh, yeah, okay, here we go. Why not? We'll throw this one in here because this might actually fit. Something that's been sitting in pocket for some time that somebody brought to my attention on Twitter. Is this it? I don't know whether this is the tweet that I found it. No, apparently not. Okay. So jumping back to the article that resulted. This from July 1st and has been waiting ever since. Richmond, Virginia police had to retract their 2020 tweet about tear gassing demonstrators at Confederate statue. Dean Mirshahi reporting for, what do we have here? The ABC affiliate Channel 8 in Richmond. The Richmond Police Department has retracted a June 2020 tweet that said tear gas had to be used around the former General Robert E. Lee monument to get officers to safety who were, quote, were cut off by violent protesters. This would be, I think, in the aftermath of, well, it's a part of the broader BLM protests, but also the already existing protest against Confederate monuments everywhere in Virginia and elsewhere. But as I recall, this was one of the protests that involved some sitting state senators as well, who insisted, no, we're involved in peaceful protest here. Why the tear gas? And as it turns out, 2 years later, 2 years down the road, they finally have forced the Richmond Police Department to say, yeah, that was kind of not actually justified. And we were sort of lying about everything that was going on at the time. And wow, what a strange thing to find out later on. A lawsuit settlement between demonstrators and the city stipulated that the department must publicly acknowledge the tweet as false, according to the law firm that filed the suit. It's a good ask. There were no RPD officers cut off by violent protesters at the Lee Monument. There was no need for gas at the Lee Monument to get RPD officers to safety. One of the department's 6 tweets retracting the 2020 tweet said on Friday. That's a pretty good settlement. Protests spread across the country that summer following the police killings of George Floyd in Minneapolis and Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, including in Richmond, where people seeking police reforms marched in the city's streets and a curfew was implemented. On June 1st, 2020, Richmond police officers tear gassed a crowd of peaceful demonstrators near the former Lee statue on Monument Avenue without warning, and before the 8 p.m. curfew set by Mayor LeVar Stoney. To our peaceful protesters, we are sorry we had to deploy gas near the Lee Monument. Some RPD officers in that area were cut off by violent protesters. The department tweeted at 8:08 p.m. that night. The gas was necessary to get them to safety. The next day, Stoney and Richmond Police Chief William Smith, who resigned later that month, apologized to hundreds of people outside Richmond City Hall who demanded answers. It's better than tear gassing them again, that's for sure. That's what happens in most places. Lawsuits were filed on behalf of 6 demonstrators by Andrew Bodoh, B-O-D-O-H, I hope I've pronounced that right, or something close, an attorney at the civil rights and personal injury law firm Thomas H. Roberts and Associates, P.C., and a settlement was reached. The terms of the deal were not disclosed when the settlement was announced in February of 2022, but the federal judge overseeing the lawsuit directed that the protective order in the case should be lifted in July, and that's now. The firm said the settlement would make police records in the case public and require the department to issue a retraction to the tweet. On Friday, a Richmond police spokesperson confirmed to 8 News that RPD will be posting a retraction this afternoon on Twitter. And I didn't want you to miss it, although you did miss it because I had to wait until now. Richmond police issued a retraction in a Twitter thread on July 1st that states the original tweet was false and is retracted. At that time, there were multiple demonstrations in progress, not all of which were peaceful. However, as a result of some confusion, maybe, that's what they're saying, as a result of some confusion amongst the various ongoing demonstrations at multiple locations in the city involving multiple monuments all at the same time, it does appear, they're hedging now, that at the time tear gas was initially dispersed at the Lee Monument, that the crowd was peaceful. 2 of the tweets in the thread read. That's a little bit of hedging, if you ask me. The federal lawsuit that was settled claimed that the officers violated protesters' First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, and 14th Amendment rights, a similar argument from other civil lawsuits in response to the incident. Jonathan Arthur, an attorney at the firm who demonstrated at the Lee Circle and later filed a lawsuit against the officers, called out the department for the tweet. This statement was false from the beginning. It distorted the truth of a violent, illegal police attack from the first moments the world learned of it. You can't undo a false first impression, but this acknowledgement should prevent future generations from believing the falsity. Well, I hope that lesson is absorbed. We get it here, naturally, because we're so awesome and smart. And that's just what we do. We hang around being awesome and smart. Which is why you're staying tuned for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What's he got in store for you? Let's see what we can squeeze in before the music tells us to get lost. The GOP blocked a bill protecting a woman's right to travel because they don't even need to hide it anymore.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, we should have squeezed that into the first hour and a half that we discussed the abortion issue, but good. There's, of course, lots more to discuss, and thankfully Justice is here to take that different angle on those things, and you'll never believe it, news from around the country and around the world, much of it involving Nazis. But stay tuned. We'll see you next week.